Hey everybody, Adam with Front Range Storm Contractors here. Today is September 11th, 2019. I've just finished putting my older sons to bed, and Ronan asked me where I got this shirt from. So I told him a little bit of the story, and I decided since I haven't put this down before that I'll go ahead and just kind of share my story with all of you guys. So my 9/11 story actually starts a little bit before 9/11. February 2001, had my first child. So I was going to school at the time. I was working at Capital One, doing customer service for them. And over that summer, I was looking into doing a side hustle to try to just provide a little bit more. And so I was checking out this company called Primerica, which is a subsidiary of Citibank. It was an MLM company that sold life insurance and savings products and then some investment products and other things like that. And so starting out with an MLM, they're like, make a list of your family and friends that you would call and, give them this pitch. And so one of the people on my list was my parents, because they would at least listen to me, right? So September 10th, 2001, my supervisor and I go over to my parents' house to give them the spiel and try to sell them some life insurance and other stuff. But the life insurance was the main product. And so, probably a half dozen times during the pitch, my supervisor said something along the lines of, God forbid that you don't wake up tomorrow, or that, you don't, or that you died tomorrow, you pass away tomorrow, to my dad. What do you have in place to take care of, my mom and the other kids that were still at home? And I think my dad had like some company provided life insurance of like $30-some thousand or something like that. I figured out they actually probably should have had more like $500,000 at least. So we did sign my parents up for some life insurance. And then the next day, I go to work at Capital One, and my day started at about 8 o'clock in the morning. It was in a suburb of Washington, D.C., so it's about an hour before the first plane hit the South Tower. And maybe, I don't know, hour and 15 minutes, hour and a half into my shift, one of the guys from my team is downstairs in the break room, which is where the only TV was in the building. At least the only one that was like available for the employees to watch. And I think he was just getting like a soda or something like that, and came back upstairs pretty anxious and said we only need to turn on the radio. Plane's just flown into the World Trade Center. Now this guy was a little dramatic about things to begin with, so I was kind of like, no, whatever. But somebody turned the radio on, and that was just about all that was on the radio at the time. And so we had probably 50 people or so on the phones at that time, and so people started to get a little anxious, a little curious, trying to figure out what was going on, listening to the radio, and then somebody else turned the radio on, and somebody else turned the radio on, and our phone calls pretty much stopped. I mean, all 50 of us were like phone call after phone call after phone call until right about when we turned the radio on. Then it slowed down to like one person gets a phone call, and then 10 minutes later another person got a phone call, and then that was pretty much it. Like, it literally died. And not because the phones weren't working, just because everybody else in the world seemed had their TV on and was watching what was happening. Now, at the time, my dad was working at the Pentagon. So as we're sitting there listening to the radio, and a second plane flies into the other tower, and then a third plane flies into the Pentagon. I'm thinking, like, it's my fault. I somehow killed my dad. This plane flew into the Pentagon, killed my dad, because just last night we were saying things like, God forbid that you die tomorrow. Now, my dad is still alive today, but I didn't know that day, until that evening, because my dad wasn't able to get a hold of my mom because there was so many phone calls that just all the phone lines basically crashed. There were no calls coming in or out of that area. My dad couldn't get a hold of my mom until like 3 hours after they were evacuated from the Pentagon, and couldn't get home until several hours after that, and I couldn't really get a hold of my mom until later that evening also. None of us knew, nobody in my family knew which part of the Pentagon my dad worked in. And so the Pentagon is, if you're looking at it from the top down, like on Google Maps or something, there are 5 rings. Each one has 5 sides in the shape of a pentagon. That's where it gets its name from. And then in the center there is a courtyard, the center of the rings. So this plane, let's say it hit from this side of the Pentagon. I don't know what side it actually hit on, but it crashed into the ground and then slid into the Pentagon. And it went through, I can't remember exactly now, it's either 3 or 4 rings of the Pentagon. So it didn't go through that inner ring on the side that it hit, and it didn't go through the courtyard. But if it had done those things and then gone through the first ring on the far side, it would have went right through my dad's office. So that seems extremely close, right? Like, thank goodness that the plane hit the ground first and then slid into the building, instead of just crashing into the building and the ground at the same time and then smearing through, the entire building. Also, luckily, and I can say it that way, there weren't many people in that part of the Pentagon because it had just gone through a remodel, and so there weren't people actually staffed working in the offices in that section. Otherwise, the numbers, would have been so much worse from that day. But like I said, we could see on the news what part the plane hit, but nobody knew what part of the Pentagon my dad worked in until later. And obviously, 18 years later, I'll never forget. However, for my dad's retelling of his experience of that day, he says he heard a loud bang, and it was a little bit of a shake, maybe like a minor earthquake kind of thing, and then there were all the signs and stuff to evacuate, and so they all evacuated. But he had no idea what happened until they were actually outside of the building in the parking lot, and then he could see all of the smoke and saw the plane, and that kind of stuff. So yes, there was actually a plane that crashed into the Pentagon, for all you conspiracy theorists out there. And so, at the same time, even though it was so close, it's such a large building and so structurally well built that it was also far away at the same time. So close yet so far. And so I'm very grateful for that. So that's my experience with 9/11. My dad is retired Air Force. At the time, he was a contractor working in counterterrorism with the government, for the government, which he still continues to do. But I also have 3 sisters who were in the Air Force but have gotten out. And I have a brother-in-law who just last year retired from the Marines. And I have a second brother-in-law who is active duty Air Force Reserve, which means that he's in the reserves, but he works, 40-hour weeks every week for them, not just, 1 weekend a month kind of thing. And then I have another another brother-in-law, third brother-in-law, who is in the Army Reserves. And I have a fourth brother-in-law who's in the Navy. And I don't know if he's Navy Reserves or just a regular Navy, but he does work full-time for the Navy. He's actually stationed in Japan right now. So, in my immediate family, I have a lot of military history. And so I've always been, very appreciative of members of our military and armed services and first responders, and really appreciate what they do for us. So this shirt, back to the shirt now, a couple of weeks after 9/11, there was a telethon on TV, and I can't remember what it was called. I never got to see it. It was just before DVRs, and I was working at the time. Capital One actually provided the people that were answering the phones, taking the donations. And so I was one of those people who was answering phones, taking donations from the people that were calling in about the telethon. And that's where I got the shirt from. It says Capital One, we care, with the American flag on there. From working that telethon. I did not plan to wear this shirt today. Every year on 9/11, I post something on social media about how, I'll never forget, and I love my dad, and I'm so glad that he's still with us, and those kinds of things. And I usually do that first thing in the morning, but I didn't do that this year for some reason. And I was wearing a different shirt earlier in the morning, but I spilled something on it during the day. And so I was working from home today, just doing stuff in the office. But before I had to go out this evening, I changed my shirts because the other one was a mess. And this is the one that I coincidentally pulled out, not even thinking about it. And my son Ronan asked me where I got it from when I put him to bed. And so I just figured, I really should say something. Even though it's not the very beginning of the day, I need to still put this out there that I love you, Dad. I'm very grateful for everybody that serves this country. I will never forget where I was on September 11th, 2001. And, because of those things, I have USAA insurance for my car and rental insurance. And we give special discounts to any customers that have USAA insurance, because I know how you qualify for that insurance. You or somebody in your family has to have military or DOD experience. So even though their customer service has gone downhill a little bit lately, they're not the easiest to work with, I still enjoy helping those customers that qualify for USAA insurance. And also, if you qualify for USAA insurance, then we're hiring. We will hire you. No questions asked. I'll train you in the things that you need to learn, but your work ethic and your integrity and things like that, we really value at Front Range Storm Contractors. So if you need a job, we're hiring. Again, don't ever forget where you were September 11th, 2001. I know I won't. And I probably should have said it earlier in the day, but I love you, Dad. Have a good one, everybody.